afternoon and good evening to everyone who has signed in today, and a really warm welcome to the second ICOMOS International Emerging Professionals webinar for 2020. Now, I'm Stacey Vallis, I'm the Secretary for the EPWG, and on this call with me are my peers and key coordinators for the EPWG coordination, communications and translations team. So Gabriel Caballero, Clara Villalba, Virginia Rush, Sana Nia, Anna Gainatinova, Lo Marik, and Laura Maxwell from the ICOMOS Secretariat, and of course Nicole Franceschini, who has helped bring various groups together today. So before we begin, I will ask our mentors, Toshi, Sheridan, Gideon, and Mikhail, if you would like to share a few words at this stage to mark this event, where I can see we're close to we're numbering close to 200 people and across several continents. So Toshi, over to you and our mentors.
Thank you, Stacey. Welcome to this EPWG webinar today. This is the second webinar organized by Emerging Professionals Working Group of ICOMOS. And I'm very happy to see that so many people are joining us today. This webinar series is based on a fully voluntary work of emerging professionals of ICOMOS, and the topic was chosen from their pure interest, and I'm very happy to see this development. And I'm very much, and a welcome to, I'd like to also appreciate Eugene and Tim from IUCN and ICOMOS to join this webinar. It is extremely exciting to see that we have so important speakers. Also, Susan McIntyre and Maureen from ICOMOS. It's a wonderful organization and an event. I'm very much looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Toshi. Right. So, by way of a brief summary and an introduction to the ICOMOS International Emerging Professionals Working Group, the group was established in 2017 with the aim of supporting dialogue between established and emerging practitioners, or those at an early stage of their career. So over the previous 3 years, the group has grown to approximately 90 representatives from ICOMOS's national and international scientific, and has been involved with a range of ICOMOS ongoing scientific projects, and of course with the invaluable support from our men. So if you are interested in being part of a wide, active, growing network, please do get in touch with us using the contact emails that were circulated as part of our program, and also via Facebook, as we would love to hear from you. So today, we are thrilled to host 4 speakers who will foreground the culture-nature journey across ICROM, IUCN, and of course ICOMOS. So they are familiar faces who many will know. So I would also like to thank Susan, Maureen, Eugene, and Jo, and Tim for taking the time to share your thoughts and insights as a series of quick-fire, rapid PowerPoints. So following these presentations, we will be opening the floor to a multilingual Q&A session that will be managed by my emerging professionals colleagues. And I note that questions are invited in English, French, Spanish, and Russian. So to ensure that this session is as smooth and as enjoyable as possible for all of us, we'll now share and run through a few housekeeping and technical points. So firstly, please ensure that your microphone is muted to avoid any background sound, and please share your full name and affiliation, as these details are required for security reasons. If you don't, or if you do not wish to share these details, you can also watch the webinar live stream via Facebook. You are invited to share your questions using the Zoom chat box located to the right of your screen, and we'll return to these queries during the open Q&A segment, where we will do our best to capture a wide range to support the discussion, and of course bearing in mind the time constraint. Also, do feel free to switch off your video if needed. However, if you would like to speak, please do switch it on and ensure that there is sufficient light, as we would love to put names to faces. Last, that we are testing a number of webinar technology and translations formats today with the aim of expanding this series. So we do ask for your patience and issues. So without further ado, up first we have Susan Tamboy. Susan is a cultural heritage research specialist and a practitioner with 30 years experience in Australia and overseas. With PhD in archaeology, her experience includes a broad range of Indigenous and non-Indigenous archaeological projects, heritage planning, historic site conservation, asset management, and cultural heritage research. She is the Associate Director at the Naveen Office Heritage Consultants and is an adjunct professor at the James Cook University in Australia. So Susan will be giving an introduction to the CultureNature Journey. So at that, I'll stop sharing my screen, and Sue, it'll be over to you.
Hello, everybody. Even though it's very tropical behind me, it's very cold where I am. So if I start shivering, it's because I'm in my little river shack, solar power only. So hopefully it will work. It's definitely culture nature here. I just like to thank the organisers for inviting myself and the other people from CultureNature Journey and Connecting Practice project to talk to you today. We decided that since the two projects are related to each other, that we would take this form of doing these short presentations and then having a discussion. We've been to some CultureNature Journey, and so some of this may seem familiar to you. I apologise if I'm going over any ground and you know it all already. So nature culture and nature cultures. We've all, for at least 2 decades, people have been increasingly concerned with the inability of some of our systems now to really deal with that interconnectedness of culture and nature. We're so defined by these differences in terms of sometimes in our countries, the money systems, the funding for heritage, the way that heritage is managed in our countries. The divide is embedded so much. And so I think one of the things that people have found when they've been practitioners or researchers is that this dichotomy isn't real, and that it actually holds us back from achieving some of the conservation outcomes that we really want to achieve. I think many of you, particularly the ones who've recently been students or are students now, people will find that they'll say, we've done this before, we've heard these papers, where there's been papers on particularly the cultural landscape issues, how developing new methods which are more holistic. There's been projects on biocultural diversity. People will have seen some of these terms and started to address some of them. But I think for us, the CultureNature Journey is one of the first times that we've tried to mobilize this in a way that brings particularly the IUCN interests and the ICOMOS interests together. So if you can think of this as a continuation of work that's been started in many different little spheres elsewhere, and trying to localize it in a way that hasn't happened before. So the CultureNature Journey, as I said, is a collaboration. It's between ICOMOS, IUCN, but not only them. We also have all these other partners, the World Heritage Centre, ICROM, the Secretariat for the Convention of Biological Diversity. It's really is a collaboration. And if there's one rule about the CultureNature Journey, it is about collaboration. There's too many times we hear people say, oh yes, but we talk about culture and nature amongst ourselves. We think we know it amongst ourselves. We talk about our view of nature amongst the cultural people, and the natural people also talk about culture amongst themselves. But this idea that you actually bring together the specialists, the people who are actively working in these fields, and you sort of create new knowledge by bringing people together and forcing them in some ways to work together, is quite a new thing for our organisations, I think. So we see it as a creative space, and it's a space where specialists, researchers, practitioners can all come together. There's very few rules in terms of the CultureNature Journey, and it certainly is an unusual de-siloing sort of exercise. We haven't set up ISCs, the International Scientific Committees. We haven't set up formal mechanisms or organisations or structures. It's one of the interesting things for ICOMOS members when you see that ISCs become silos in their own right. Everybody wants a little kingdom, and if you can't have the whole big ICOMOS, people get the little ICOMOS through their ISC. You see the same thing at home. Sometimes in your countries, the idea that there's little national scientific committees. No matter what we do in terms of trying to create new opportunities for people, it seems to be a bit of a tendency for us all to create these little silos. So there's little silos within big silos, but the CultureNature Journey isn't that. There is no controlling group. There is no barrier to membership, and because the idea is it is a creative space, and we want people to localize it in their own countries and in their own ways. The only thing we would say is keep us in the loop, because what we'd like to hear from people is what's happening in those places. So just to let people know a little bit of background to the CultureNature Journey. The first journey was titled the Nature Culture Journey, and was organised by the IUCN at the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii. And it was such a great event. It was sponsored by US ICOMOS, and it brought together, really for the first time in the same space, people from all sorts of different protected area managers. It brought together local people in Hawaii who were interested in some of these aspects. It brought Indigenous people, many Indigenous people who were funded to go to those, the World Conservation Congress, all together to form this Nature Culture Journey, as it was. And everyone was so excited by that. I can remember Peter Phillips, I'm not sure if he's listening in, and running out and ringing Rohit straight away and saying, we need to have one of these next year in India. And Rohit Jigiyasu, perhaps without knowing exactly what he was getting into, said yes. So we had the next event in the CultureNature Journey in Delhi. And the names were switched around, CultureNature, Nature Culture, partly to reflect the different perspective, I guess, that the host organisation was bringing to the event. Delhi was very interesting because also one of the things that came out of there was this idea that we shouldn't separate the words. We should call it culture nature without a space between, because we're really trying to show how we are breaking down that barrier. Then in 2018, we decided that we were going to try and ramp up activities until 2020. And so there were a number of journey events that different countries decided to host in their own areas. India hosted one through the Wildlife Institute of India. Then there was one at Fiji, and I noticed that Kerame signed in. So Kerame Dennis from Australia ICOMOS, who was instrumental in developing the Australia ICOMOS and ICOMOS Pacifica joint symposium, and we had a small Culture Nature event there. There was a large Culture Nature event at US ICOMOS at an international symposium there, which was an amazing event, quite a large event. Singapore, IFLA held a Culture Nature Knowledge Cafes in Singapore. There was a capacity building workshops, of course, that many of you may have attended. Roran Zhang from China found that he couldn't organise, wasn't appropriate to organise an actual event bringing people together. So he came up with a much more creative idea of this series of interviews with the various travellers on the journey to capture their experiences. And I think that program is still ongoing. Tsukuba workshops, of course. There was one in September, and one earlier. And then in Canberra, there was a mini workshop and knowledge cafe for the Australian World Heritage Site Managers. That involved a whole range of Indigenous site managers, as well as the boards and the various other things for the protected areas for the World Heritage Sites. And then there was an event in Nepal as well. There are probably some I've missed, but these are the ones that have been reported to us and that we know because we've been involved in. So the outputs and activities are being quite varied from this sort of activity, this range of events and activities. We find that there's publications. At last count, there was around 52 peer-reviewed Culture Nature papers, but I'm just doing an update now, and there's new ones trickling in. That includes books, book chapters, and articles in peer-reviewed journals. So there's an amazing amount of these that are happening all the time. Already since I put out the call for an update, I've received word that there are several more books, edited volumes with multiple participants, and I'll be updating that list shortly. There's two statements, important statements that have come out. The first was Mālama Honua, to care for our island earth, and that came out from the Congress in Hawaii. And then there was the Yatra of Tammanah, which was, I guess, an artificial, as Nepal has told me many times, it doesn't quite fit together, but a putting together of an Urdu word and a Hindi word to really show the integration that we experienced in Delhi. And that translates roughly to our wishful aspirations and the Yatra, our purposeful journey. Each of these documents is available in multiple languages, and so I would invite you to have a look at them. One of the things they really do start to convey, though, is this idea that we found very powerful in the Culture Nature Journey, that one of the issues, not only about the Western idea of nature and culture as these separate entities, which has permeated many of our own national heritage legislations, but also the fact that English cannot always capture the sort of nuances that particularly Indigenous peoples have when they think about culture and nature, when they think about the spirituality that's sometimes embedded in landscapes or in places. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is create, if you like, a new language for heritage. And, we're exploring language in these ways. So I think if you look at the Yatra of Tammanah, there was a list of words in that drew from the Hawaiian experience in the year before, and also then included other languages. And we're really interested in this concept that people can add to this concept. So when you think about what heritage means for you in your home country and in your own culture, there are presumably words that you will find that would be very interesting for us to hear from you, because the words that actually capture the way people feel about heritage, or the way people interact with their heritage, the way that people see the culture embedded in nature. So we're very interested in exploring that aspect of in the Culture Nature Journey. There's been at least over 10 quite large and reasonably sized culture nature and nature culture events that have been held. There was clearly going to be a lot more planned, and life has, you know, managed to throw us a bit of a curveball in that respect. So we had our plan, and our plan was to smoothly go along to the 2020 GA, ramping things up. And then, of course, there's the reality of what happens to your perfect plans. So one of the key things we were looking to do was with these other events as we went to 2020. The reason that we saw 2020 is so important was here was a year when not only was ICOMOS holding its triennial GA, General Assembly, but the World Conservation Congress, which only happens every 4 years, was also in 2020. So it was almost like the planets coming into alignment. So there was this idea that we would take the culture-nature journey through these series of activities, and then to 2020 in June, we would go to Marseille, and then in October, we would end up in Sydney. And so this idea of the journey and progressing to something was very important. With the early professionals and the youth forums that the IUCN have, the idea was to go from the large youth forum in Marseille and bring people through to Cockatoo Island in Sydney, where there was a large youth and youth camp also planned. So this idea, of course, fell foul because of the COVID-19. But we'd gone a big way to setting up for it. And one of those was that we'd had set up this informal brains trust idea. Everyone hated that term. I think I coined that term, but everyone hated it. So we've changed it. No more brains trust. It's now the official CultureNature Journey consultative group for the various events we've had. There's about 18 people on that from IUCN and ICOMOS. And those people have been working very hard to try and, you know, build sort of viable journeys, both in Marseille and in Sydney. So for the WCC, we had 18 CultureNature Journey sessions proposed. There's not a formal journey. There's no, the Congress wasn't planned to be organised in journeys this time. So we were creating a journey out of the sort of series of things that were happening there. And Tim will talk you to a bit more about that, because there's still hope that the WCC will happen. I think it's scheduled for January now. We also set up an email distribution list of ICOMOS members interested in the CultureNature Journey, ICOMOS and IUCN members. At the moment, we've got around 90 members, and they were sourced from the original e-news ads that we put out. But if there are people who aren't on that email distribution but would like to be on that email distribution, they can just let me know. Due to the privacy laws in Europe, I have to get an email from you saying, please add me to the mailing list for the CultureNature Journey, so that I have that on record and, you know, we're not spamming you. There's also a digital media Facebook page, which was set up prior to the Delhi GA, and it continues to grow. Thank you to Nicole Francescini for setting that up. And there is a website under development. So here we were at the start of 2020, all getting anxious and excited about what was in store for us this year, madly working, and preparation, of course, was well underway for the ICOMOS GA 2020. With Richard Mackay and others at the helm. There was no way that wasn't going to be fully organised and under control. Discussions were firming up on an IUCN ICOMOS agreement, which was going to be launched at the 2020 GA. And the CultureNature Journey Brains Trust was formalised, as I said, as the consultative group for the CNJ at the 2020 GA. I was appointed as the official co-convener for the CNJ, and Tim was the co-chair from IUCN. And we've had many Zoom meetings and Skypes during that planning session. The consultative group was galvanised and together managed to pull together session proposals for WCC in Marseille in very short notice, actually. And we selected the artwork by emerging Indigenous Australian artist Tia Ropian as the CNJ logo. If I just flick back to the start of my presentation, you'll notice that these three designs across the middle there. So in Hawaii, the WCC for the whole Congress adopted this hibiscus, stylized hibiscus with the like a little hint of traditional patterns. And when the CultureNature Journey decided, it was such a huge offering across so many different sort of venues at the World Conservation Congress, they used the little hibiscus as a little marker so that you could actually trace your journey by following proposals that had this little marker beside them in the program. We thought that was a brilliant idea. So in Delhi, we did the same thing, and we took the stylized Bodhi leaf as the marker, and we marked the CultureNature Journey offerings. So even if they weren't in the stream session of CultureNature, but if they interacted with CultureNature, you could see them connected throughout the whole GA symposium. So the next design we chose was this one by Tio, which was going to be at the 2020 GA. So Tio is actually an emerging artist in his own right. He's an Indigenous artist. And this work is a liner cut of his, which he kindly said that we could use. And it's a story. It's based on a traditional story about the emu and the brolga. They were best friends, but the emu had her children and the brolga had her children. They would go out to the bush gathering yams, which is a sort of a root vegetable for the tribe. But the emu was jealous of the brolga and her well-behaved kids. And so the emu betrayed her by hiding her kids and pretending to have killed them. She then persuaded the brolga to kill her children, because telling her they could be too much for her and they were too much to handle. Somehow she convinces the brolga to kill her children, which she does, but she keeps two. And then the emu calls for her children to come out from hiding, and she turns to her and says, "I tricked you, I made you kill your children while I hid my kids." So this image and this story, we chose it because it reflects a couple of things. It shows how nature is used to still portray messages for people today. The way that nature is actually a vehicle, I guess, for carrying culture. And the fact that it's an artwork shows that it's how culture interprets nature. So there's this link between these two things. And I think if you look at Indigenous Australian spirituality, if you look at the dream time or before time, as they call it up in Cape York, where Tia's from, in the before time, animals were not just animals and people weren't people. So the animals were anthropomorphic in the sense that they were very sentient and that they had lives of, they directed their own lives, and they impacted on nature. They created nature as they went. Their activities created springs and wells and mountains and various other things. And their behavior could cause bad things to happen or good things to happen. So this interconnectedness between nature and culture is really, really prevalent in Indigenous Australian culture. And we were very glad to have that image to use. But then all good plans, and if you can see my high-tech skills here, because that little thing that someone told me looked a little bit like it might be a dog is actually a squashed emu that I added there. So COVID-19 happened and crashed down on our journey, on our road, killed our emu, and made us take pause to think about how we would keep this CultureNature Journey momentum going. We think there's still many opportunities for people to collaborate, and we're not giving up. we see this creative space evolving in many different ways. And so one of the things that we looked at, we've been noting, is the areas of interest that have been emerging. It's from Hawaii through to New Delhi, and then through the various other events, and to seeing the offerings that people made for sessions in Marseille and in the 2020 GA. We've had that privilege of seeing the areas that people are really focusing on and working in, and there are many areas emerging. This list is not exhaustive of the creativity and the work that's happening, But the relationship between culture-nature journey and climate change impacts and responses is clearly an important one. Climate change has its own, obviously its own working group, and it has many interests in there. So there's things like embodied energy of buildings and all of that sort of thing. Some of those things aren't directly related to culture nature, but if you look at the culture nature journey, there is a really clear interconnection between climate change impacts and responses when you're talking about people using land, how people are living, people's lifestyles, lifeways, the cultural sites and how they're being impacted themselves physically. There's just a whole range of things there that are being teased out by people working on the culture nature journey. There's a development of people-centered methodologies. And this, again, is something that's, the culture nature journey doesn't claim to have invented. This is something that people have been working on for several decades now, and it's evolving all the time, but it's certainly an area of interest, both to IUCN and ICOMOS, ICROM, the World Heritage Centre. It's certainly an area that's really, you'll hear about it in the Connecting Practice project. And it's becoming a very important area of study for people on the culture nature journey. The role of the urban landscapes, and particularly the historic urban landscape, in the conservation of both natural and cultural values. This is a really interesting one because we haven't quite got the, if you like, the work hasn't been done here yet. The work is still quite separate happening between IUCN and ICOMOS, but it's an area that's a particular interest and growth area because with ICOMOS and the work that the ICOMOS is doing on the historic and urban landscape, and the various groups in IUCN who are working in urban areas, we see great potential for that to be a really fruitful area of activity. The natural values of cultural landscapes is an important one of interest. Increasingly, people are seeing that you're not going to get the natural conservation outcomes you want only looking at large protected areas that are around natural values only. But we need to be looking at the natural values of cultural landscapes, and of course the cultural aspects of the cultural values of nature as the other one. So the other area that's very, very active is the interconnection of natural and cultural values in rural landscapes. And I think at nearly every major step along the culture nature journey, there have been sessions, workshops, knowledge cafes, a whole range of things on this, particularly led by people like Brenda Barrett and Nora Mitchell and Steve Brown from Australia, and Roran Zhang as well from China. So that is a particularly fruitful area. The development of more inclusive rights-based approaches. This is, absolutely one of the most important things that we have to get right in the future. There have been so many cases where this has been got wrong. And there are so many different things that people are doing. And I think Nicole, Tim might touch a bit more on this later because of the Panorama Solutions project, which is certainly looking for sort of best practice examples in various things here. The other one we see is this methodologies and approaches relating to spiritual and faith-based values of landscapes. There's a lot of work that's been done in this area, but it has tended to be separate work done by ICOMOS on one side and people from IUCN on the other. But in recent years, I think last year, there was a collaborative volume that was put out, which included IUCN and ICOMOS people working together partially in this area as well. So these are some of the things that we see that are really, people are becoming very interested in. We see them as things that are very mutually of interest both to IUCN and ICOMOS. And in some of them, we can learn, ICOMOS can learn a lot about these things from IUCN, but in some of the areas, really ICOMOS can really lead the way in some of this as well. So it is really an equal collaboration, because we all bring something different to it. And I think that's really important to remember. This is not something where, you know, IUCN is going to suddenly be telling us about culture. And it's not where we're going to go to conferences and say we're the experts on nature. This is something where we really have to explore the credentials of each other and really start to take into account people's other interests and other skills that people have, and start to bring them together to improve our practice. So, regrouping after COVID-19, we've already commenced a few projects, and one is the co-creating guidance on nature culture integration and conservation practice. Nora Mitchell, Jessica Brown, Crystal Buckley, Maya Ishizawa, Letitia Lateo, and Steve Brown are all collaborating on that. And they've had a number of sessions with each other and tell us that they're zooming ahead, so that's great. Then also there's a Panorama Solutions Initiative, which you'll hear about from Tim. We also have this Culture, Nature and Historic Urban Landscapes emerging area, and Crystal Buckley and has been involved in that from Australia ICOMOS, working with colleagues in the IUCN. So I'm sure you'll hear more on some of these things from Tim. But I'll just say that one of the things with the CultureNature Journey is so exciting is that we don't tell people to do this. This is not something that a committee has got together and said, okay, we're going to have a work program and, you know, you and you are going to work on this. This is more like people telling us what they're doing in this area and keeping people involved, and sometimes coming to us and getting advice on who do you know in ICOMOS who would be interested in joining this, or from ICOMOS people, they'll come and say, how do we find someone in IUCN? Who are the right people in IUCN to get involved in this? So the co-creating guidance on nature, culture, integration, conservation practice, they just wrote to us and said, well, we had a session plan for Marseille. We had a session plan for the 2020 GA. And guess what? We're going to do this anyway. And we've already had several meetings, and we're just letting you know, and we'd like to keep you in the loop, which is exactly the way it should go. So one of the powerful things about this is how people take the CultureNature Journey, they apply it to their local situation and their local context, and they come up with their own projects. And I think I speak for Tim as well in this, that we see our role as helping people build those collaborations, and that's the main role, you know, of myself as a focal person for ICOMOS. Tim has a bit of a different role because he actually really has a paid job doing this as well. So, but from my perspective in ICOMOS, I see this as a way we just build these linkages for people. So that's it. But if anyone would like to be on our mailing list, just email me and say I would like to. Please add me to the CultureNature Journey mailing list. Thank you.
Yes, very much, Sue. I can see that our questions and the chat is absolutely burning up, so we look forward to returning to those during our Q&A segment. So now up next, we have Maureen Thibault. So Maureen is the project coordinator of the Connecting Practice project. As the project's assistant at the ICOMOS International Secretariat, she coordinates ICOMOS's participation in various initiatives on themes such as the nature-culture connections, reconstruction and recovery, and climate change and heritage. She also manages the internal and external communications for ICOMOS. So she is here today to present the work done within the ICOMOS IUCN practice project. So with that, over to you, Maureen.
Okay, is my microphone working?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Stacy, for that introduction. And thank you to the EPWG for organizing this webinar. I'm really excited to be here with you today to present the Connecting Practice project. So you're probably wondering, what is Connecting Practice? So the project is a joint initiative between IUCN and ICOMOS. And one of the early objectives of the project was to try to bridge the divide between nature and culture within the World Heritage System, as well as within the wider natural and cultural heritage fields. So the goal was really to explore, learn, and create new approaches that are focused on recognizing and supporting the interconnected character of the natural and cultural values of World Heritage properties. And through field visits to World Heritage properties that are chosen as case studies, the teams of experts that we send in the field can provide advice to site managers and local authorities on ways to improve the outcomes of site conservation. And as case studies, highly significant landscapes and seascapes are the specific focus of connecting practice. As you can see, we have some nice images here of some of our case studies over the years. And the fieldwork to the case study sites provides an opportunity for exchange of knowledge between the international experts and the local site managers, authorities, and especially the communities. So one of the positive outcomes of many of the field visits was bringing different stakeholders around the same table, as you can see in this image here in the center, and starting a dialogue between them that sometimes had not previously existed. And the fieldwork teams really look at the full range of values of the property, going beyond the OUV, to have a more holistic approach that encompasses all of the natural, cultural, and social values. And another goal of the project is to establish new and stronger partnerships with organizations that are already engaged in World Heritage or not, and those that are developing biocultural and community-based approaches to site management. So just to take you quickly through the 3 phases of the project. Phase 1 began in 2013 and included fieldwork to 3 sites in Mongolia, Ethiopia, and Mexico. And this first phase of the project was focused on exploration and shared learning. And some of the central questions that were explored in phase 1 were, how can IUCN and ICOMOS connect their working methods? How can we study the interconnections between natural, cultural, and social values of a property? And how can nature and culture be linked in tentative lists, upstream processes, nominations, and site management? So moving along with phase 2, which began in 2015 and included field visits to 2 sites in Hungary and a transboundary site in South Africa and Lesotho. And phase 2 was really about taking all of the lessons learned in phase 1 and putting them into practice. So the objective for the teams of experts that were on site was to work closely with local and national authorities to develop and strengthen policy and management frameworks for long-term site conservation, and basing all of this on an understanding of the interconnectedness of the natural and cultural values. And another aspect of phase 2 was to adapt existing management effectiveness methodologies. So for example, the Enhancing Our Heritage Toolkit, which was developed by IUCN and UNESCO for the conservation of natural sites, is being adapted to provide guidance for cultural properties and for integrating natural and cultural heritage. And moving along to phase 3, which is our current phase and began in 2018. We've carried out fieldwork at 4 different sites in China, the United Arab Emirates, in Senegal, and in the Portuguese Azores. And so this phase of the project really focused on organically evolved cultural landscapes, including landscapes for agriculture, such as the honey rice terraces in China, but also fishing and shellfish gathering, as in the Salam Delta in Senegal. And in this phase, we explored how to best support and sustain traditional management practices. And we also tried to develop a better understanding of how to strengthen the resilience of the sites by studying the changes that are affecting them. And this phase also included cooperation with the FAO and their program on globally important agricultural heritage systems, the GIAS designation. So we worked with 2 sites that have this designation, the honey rice terraces in China and the date palm oases that form part of the cultural sites of Alai. So this was an opportunity to include an expert from FAO in our teams that we sent on site and kind of bring a new perspective to our culture nature work. And just to give you an idea of kind of what concretely results from the field work, I have an example here of one of the case studies from phase 3, which was the Salam Delta. So this property demonstrates a synergy between a natural environment with broad biodiversity and also human activities of shellfish gathering and fishing. And it has numerous shell mounds, as you can see in the photo on the bottom, that form cultural landscapes, and also include an ensemble of funerary tumulus mounds. And so after spending about a week on site, working with the site manager and the local stakeholders, our team of experts formulated some recommendations. And I've just put a few here just to give you an idea of some of the recommendations. So after an initial work to define the values, their interconnections, and the factors affecting them, the team recommended developing an integrated management plan using, for example, the Enhancing Our Heritage methodology. The team also strongly encouraged bringing the different stakeholders around the same table for better planning and pooling of available resources. And the team also suggested strengthening activities to ecological issues and environmental education, so especially water and waste management to protect the site. And in phase 3, we've also added in some extras in addition to our field work. So one of the extras is the survey of site managers. So this survey is intended to go beyond our small group and involve others in our connecting practice work. So we launched it at the Site Managers Forum in Baku last summer. And we received 30 questionnaires. So the analysis is currently underway by fellow EP Liana Wigbolas. I don't know if she's with us. And the results will be in the final report of phase 3. And just to give you an idea of some of the things we asked the site managers about, we asked them about the values and attributes of their site, if they were managing the cultural and natural heritage separately or in an integrated way. We asked them about their collaboration with local communities and indigenous peoples. And we also asked them about the relevance of certain concepts in their work. For example, resilience, biodiversity, and traditional knowledge. And speaking of certain concepts, one of the other kind of extras for phase 3 is the Connecting Practice Annotated Glossary. So the idea was to start a glossary that would be kind of an additional resource for culture nature work. And it's being led by Crystal Buckley and Liana Wigbolas. And what they've done is really fantastic. They've identified 3 families of words with kind of a central term in each bubble here. And they've been exploring the definitions of all of these related words that you can see around the main terms. and kind of going through all of the literature, seeing how they're defined and used in natural and cultural heritage practice, and how we can kind of bring them together. So it's very ambitious, but very exciting. And finally, just to reflect on what has been achieved so far with connecting practice. We've started and built a shared process between IUCN and ICOMOS, and have brought in new partners since the beginning of the project, in which we intend to continue to do so. The project serves as a platform for experiential learning, where field-based collaboration is really at the heart of the project. And ultimately, the project enables us and our partners to test ideas that can hopefully influence a shift in the ways culture and nature are considered, not only in the implementation of the World Heritage Convention, but also beyond in the wider heritage fields. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Now, our third speaker is Eugene Jo. Eugene is the program coordinator for the joint IUCN and ICROM World Heritage Leadership Program. Prior to joining the program, she was a World Heritage focal point and has held staff and consultancy positions. She will give an introduction today to the IUCN ICROM World Heritage Leadership Program. So the stage is all yours, Eugene.
Thank you, Stacey. Sorry, I couldn't quite figure out the unmute button with the full screen on. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Eugene Jo. Well, good morning and good evening to everybody around the world. I'm the program coordinator for the ICROM IUCN World Heritage Leadership Program. It's a great pleasure to be here. I would also like to just kind of slightly flag up that I am also a member of the ICOMOS Korean National Committee as well. So a small addition to my affiliation. I'm here to talk a little bit more about what we're doing in the World Heritage Leadership Program, what's happening and how everybody can also connect. Because the World Heritage Leadership Program is actually very much based on the previous works that's been done with ICOMOS and IUCN, basing a lot of its activities on the different outputs and results stemming from the CultureNature Journey and also from the connecting practice. So it's a program that's jointly delivered together with ICROM and IUCN in collaboration with ICOMOS and the UNESCO World Heritage Center. And it's actually a capacity building program that builds itself on the World Heritage Capacity Building Strategy that was adopted in 2011. The strategy recognizes that building up the capacity of individual practitioners, strengthening the relationship between the communities and networks, as well as improving the institutional structures and processes is vital for forging change in the way that we practice heritage conservation. So it aims to build the capacity of heritage practitioners with a people-centered approach to the integration of nature and culture and enhancing the management practices of heritage places. So it's a 6-year program, which is in its 4th year of implementation right now. That's been generously funded by the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment. And we also have activities also funded by the Swiss Federal Office of Environment and the Korean Cultural Heritage Administration. The strength of this program is that it's a collaborative program. So we actually welcome different partners to engage with us, to participate, and where we seek to have better practice by working together with many different partners across culture and nature. And I guess the only difference with the Nature Culture Journey or the CultureNature Journey and connecting practice is that we're actually stemming from all of the very wonderful initiatives and creative ideas that's been promoted by these different activities, and we just put a bit of a programmatic aspect behind all the good ideas to make sure that it's molded into a capacity building program. So the program actually has two main lines of work. One is to build and enhance the knowledge for heritage conservation. So it's really just to gather up all the ideas that's been being developed, but then actually be able to put them into the formats of manuals, guidance, and toolkits. So we're talking about primarily World Heritage manuals and guidance, but we also respect that these manuals and guidances are not just there for just World Heritage, but actually for many different heritage sites around the world. And the other line of work is actually to implement diverse capacity building activities. So for networking and promoting the acquisition of the knowledge accumulated. So these are courses, workshops, fora that is actually used to promote the different knowledge pulled out and pushed out through the different manuals and guidances. And we have this continuous mechanism of feedback and reviewing the work that we produce so that it allows us to produce relevant materials that is applicable to the ground, but also making sure that the produced materials are shared and utilized widely. So rather than just having a guidance manual just be published and be set out in open air and in a website, it's actually to put an active role in trying to share that results and promote it to a wider range of users. So our work is based on really understanding about the place and the people and how it connects to all the values that we hold as heritage places. So rather than isolating the heritage on its own, we recognize that management is very much reliant on understanding the place as a whole. Although the heritage is actually designated for the heritage values itself, in order to protect and conserve the values, we have to know the wider context. And the heritage has to sit within the larger context, and we need to understand its interactions with the people and with the environment around it, the natural environment around it. So it would equip the heritage place with much better mechanisms, not just dealing with drastic or inevitable change, but we can actually be much more prepared to manage change so that we're not freezing it completely, but we're actually able to control the speed or the quality of change. And we may be able to protect and conserve the heritage that can be beneficial to both the heritage site itself, but also to society. So the program addresses management as a whole. So it's to put forward better management practices with the people and place perspective, and integrating the different manuals and toolkits into a holistic framework. So although we address management, the broader concept of management, we do have a focused concentration on impact assessment and also resilience, about disaster risk management and also climate change adaptation. And I'm just putting out there on the screen different management cycles or evaluation cycles or risk management cycles that are taken out of the existing manuals that are usually widely shared between World Heritage practitioners from the World Heritage Resource Manuals. Now, these are actually all excellent and very useful for many different purposes. The thing is, often practitioners on the ground at site level who need to digest all of this and implement them are often just a single team or a single person who needs to deal with all these different aspects. And it's quite confusing about what to select and apply and how these cycles actually can connect to each other. So we're stemming from this issue where we're addressing the different integrations and revisions of existing manuals. So one of our main jobs is to integrate the existing manuals that are currently separate for managing cultural World Heritage and managing natural World Heritage, but we're trying to produce an integrated manual for managing World Heritage. And this is mostly to do with the basics. It's about what is management, how do we manage, and the big question of all, why are we managing it? And This will be accompanied by a revised management effectiveness assessment toolkit called the EOH, the Enhancing Our Heritage Toolkit, which Maureen already touched upon in the Connecting Practice presentation just before me. So we're often very much accustomed to practices where we're conducting a state of conservation on the heritage site itself and asking, is this heritage well protected or not? But oftentimes we kind of neglect that our management systems also need to go through that kind of assessment, where we have to regularly check and monitor whether the management system itself is healthy and efficient. So the EOH toolkit is actually designed so that we can undertake that assessment process in a structured way. And the original EOH toolkit, which used to be, which was designed originally just for natural sites, we're now trying to revise it so that cultural sites can also use them in the various different circumstances. And the whole point of doing this together is so that whatever we put out as resources for the manual of managing heritage, we can also connect the same content into the assessment toolkit for assessing management effectiveness. Our other line of work is guidance. So currently we have the environmental assessment advice note produced by IUCN, and also the heritage impact assessments guidance produced by ICOMOS, which is widely shared and used. And again, this is the classic case where we're approaching as the heritage place as categorized by either culture sites or natural sites. So we're trying to produce an integrated guidance on impact assessment for World Heritage, which would take into account all the different aspects of culture and nature surrounding and being pinpointed on the heritage values itself. The Managing Disaster Risks manual for World Heritage is now also being revised with the aspects on ecosystem-based adaptation, on climate change adaptation, and this will also be produced as one of the results of the program. Now, although these may seem seemingly sort of separate items, it is in fact very interconnected in their methodologies and their approach, because we're talking about aspects of identifying and assessing factors of impact and hazards from a larger environment and from a larger context that stretches beyond the heritage, the designated heritage site, so that we can be better prepared to manage the heritage and manage the change. So we often face many site managers already practicing, already doing management, but obviously management is not something, it's not an action that can be that can stand on its own. And we realize that we really need strategic directions that are to make sure that what we do on a day-to-day basis leads to good results, and the good results should harness the sustainable development goals so that the heritage place is actually having a very good contribution to society. And in order for this good management to take place, we need to base the management actions on the values of the place and on the people involved and understanding the overall context of the heritage place. So unless we actually base it on the reasons why we designate it as a heritage, we believe that good management is very difficult to attain. And with this very strong place and people-based management set in place, we can be better prepared for potential disasters, be sudden or gradual. We can also be actively involved in or changes by conducting robust impact assessments that can ensure that change will happen in a positive way to benefit the heritage. So our goal in all these revisions of the manuals is that we don't approach each manual separately and individually, or produce a sudden guidance just to approach impact assessment. It's actually to establish a simple knowledge framework that would have all the ABCs of heritage management that can be applicable to all heritage places. So just framing sort of a conceptual structure. And with this solid base foundation, for which for the moment we're talking, we've named it the knowledge framework for heritage management, managers will then be able to select whichever tool that they need to implement for their specific sites and their specific needs. So do they need to conduct an assessment on their management effectiveness? Do they need to conduct an impact assessment to be prepared for development? They might actually need to plan out a disaster risk management plan, or even just establish a new management plan for the coming period, or for the coming next 5 years. So it's to give a basis to all the different tools and guidances out there, so that we actually have a shared understanding of understanding what management is, and then being able to select whichever tool is best suited for our needs. And we're trying to aim so that it will take into account all the relevant advances that we've made in the fields of culture and nature. So it's very much connected to the works that's been done through the CultureNature Journey, and also through the connecting practice, whilst also respecting the World Heritage Convention processes, and being connected to other instruments as well. So connecting to the IUCN Outlook, to the Green List standards, to the Panorama platform, and also to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this is a work in progress, and we hope that this Knowledge Framework web platform, which will host the diverse guidances and manuals that we produce from this work, will be all integrated into a separate web platform that can be used widely amongst everybody. So just to, in a nutshell, to explain our approach, we start out from laying out the basics of understanding the heritage place, about the values and attributes, the people and communities, the services and benefits, the social, economic, and environmental context, understanding the buffer zones, boundaries, and wider setting, and the factors affecting the place. We also approach governance, which is one of the most important aspects that we need to understand about decision making, how it's arranged, who are the stakeholders and rights holders, what are the legal and customary frameworks, what are the institutions involved. And then, based upon these understandings and the whole context, then we can actually do management, which sets out long-term strategic directions, understanding the needs and the inputs needed for the place, with the different plans and planning processes kicking in, and actually implementing it with monitoring and evaluation always coming as behind, which will then hopefully will lead to various different results, which is not only attaining heritage conservation results, but we're also addressing wider sustainable development results, and we are constantly able to improve the management system. So although seemingly simple, the advancements made for each of these items in the fields of culture and nature are actually very different, and we're having to really draw out the strengths of each sector and how we use different terminology and how we understand these to be able to produce a one holistic manual together. So this is actually taking on a lot of brain power of different authors and reviewers, all contributing to the work. So our objective, which I would like to underline, is that we're not here to prescribe what is good. What is good can look so different from all the different sites and needs. It's actually just to provide a framework to understand what we have and what we would need for our own situations, so that site managers may be able to understand their capacities and strengths much better, to be able to build up their own management system that can be fitting to their own sites. There is no one size fits all. And how can you connect? There are many ways that you can connect, and we want you to stay connected to the issues so that we are connected to the issues on the ground, and we can be also connected with diverse people working in these places. So when you come to our courses, it's actually not just you going through a learning experience. We are going through it together with you, because we get to learn about your site and the issues that your sites face. We have the opportunity to check if our ideas, our guidance, and materials are actually applicable to your sites. And as you can see for our call for participants, we're not limiting our courses to just governmental officials or designated site managers. It's actually an open call for any heritage practitioners who are who would be willing to participate. And we want diverse people from civil society, from NGOs, policymakers, even community groups and researchers, local associations. Anybody who is working with heritage are eligible to apply to the courses, so that we can also continue to have very diverse and lively discussions, and we are able to grasp the different realities on the ground. We also host the annual Site Managers Forum that is held in conjunction with the World Heritage Committee. We've been through 3 versions of it now, starting from Poland and Bahrain and going to Azerbaijan last year. And the forum itself is about 8 days. Now you might think that's just a one-time activity or an event, but the thing is, the activities are so long-lasting because you get to actually build a network of colleagues and peers that from all around the world that you can share thoughts and ideas over time about site management issues. And since this is also the Emerging Professionals Working Group, I just take the moment to flag up the chance of internships and fellowships. And although it's much smaller in terms of numbers compared to different courses or workshops or forums, our internship program is actually very strong, going on for more than 10 years, attracting over 100 people, young professionals from all over the world. And the announcement is actually just up, so we would like to still draw your attention to it. And as a closing slide, I just want to highlight that we also have a Facebook page that posts various different news about the program, but also trying to initiate different discussions and ideas about heritage conservation and management. So all our activities are actively promoted through the ICOM official channels for social media. So that's where you can also pick up on different activities and events coming up. But Nicole is also very much engaged with all the activities that we're undertaking within World Heritage Leadership. So one way is to even just drop me a line or even ask Nicole what's going on, and we'd be happy to be connected and listen and converse. So that's the leadership program in a nutshell. And I turn it over back to you, Stacey.
Thank you very much, Eugene. So now we're keeping an eye on the time, and the 4th and final speaker is, of course, Tim Badman. Now, Tim is the director of the IUCN's Nature Culture Initiative, formerly the director of IUCN's World Heritage Program. He has been the senior IUCN spokesperson on World Heritage, chair of the IUCN World Heritage Panel, and head of IUCN's delegation at the World Heritage Committee meetings since 2007. As of April 2019, Tim leads IUCN's work in developing closer links between the nature and culture sectors, including through the World Heritage Leadership Program. Tim will be giving us an overview or a look into the future of the CultureNature Journey. So thank you, Tim.
Hi, can you hear me? Sorry, I just had to be allowed to be unmuted.
No worries, you can hear me now.
Okay, and is the, sorry, I'm just, forgive me, I'm just not seeing my screen projected. Bear with me.
We can see your screen. You might just need to switch to the PowerPoint format, that's all.
Okay. Is that now showing correctly for you?
Yes, perfect, thank you.
Okay, perfect, great. So look, firstly, thanks so much to EPWG for this invitation on behalf of myself, but I think on behalf of IUCN. For those of you that don't know IUCN, we're the International Union for Conservation of Nature. We typically get talked about as advisory body to the World Heritage Convention, but we are a much larger organization, and World Heritage is about 1% of our global effort. We're about 1,000 staff globally. And we have a series of experts organized in commissions that I think is about the same number of individuals as are members of ICOMOS. And then we are fundamentally a membership organization with states, with NGOs, and with Indigenous peoples as the three categories of IUCN member. But one of the, I think, the drivers of the connection that we've been talking about on this call and the real potential is how small the collaboration has been in this space for such a long time, and how much we've been able to build that collaboration in the last few years, as you've been hearing in the previous presentations. And so I think the first thing that I want to say is thank you to ICOMOS and also to some other partners for that work. And Toshi, with you on the call, maybe I don't get so many opportunities to speak in front of an ICOMOS audience, but I'd like to record the thanks of IUCN to ICOMOS. I'd like to mention Andrew Potts and the US Committee of ICOMOS for the initial collaboration for the Nature Culture Journey in Hawaii. Rohit, who I think is on the call, and ICOMOS India, who really enabled us to move this forward in Delhi. I'd like to mention Crystal Buckley, who was, I think, one of the first ICOMOS people that really came to IUCN's Congress meetings and started to bring our connections together. And obviously, I'd really like to thank Susan, who spoke first, for being such a wonderful person to collaborate with. I also want to thank the ICOMOS Secretariat and all of the staff there, but Gwenelle and Maureen and Liana, who've been mentioned, who've been so important in building the nuts and bolts of this collaboration. And especially I'd like to say thanks to ICOMOS Australia. It's such a sad thing that we will not be with you in October, but it's really been wonderful to be brought together for a CultureNature Journey planned for Sydney. And I think that leads me to my second comment, which is to really reiterate IUCN's real commitment to the relationship that we've been building together, and the wish to make this work. And it's why it's such an exciting, I think, step today to have the connection and the opportunity to speak to the EPWG and the emerging professionals and young professionals across ICOMOS. The Nature Culture Journey is not only about ICOMOS and IUCN, as has been mentioned, and you'll realize that because of Eugene's speaking on behalf of ICROM. I think we have other brilliant partner organizations on the call, such as the Category 2 centers supporting World Heritage, the Wildlife Institute of India, the African World Heritage Fund, who've been, I think really sort of positive about engaging in this work and helping us broaden from the usual suspects. And we wouldn't do any of this without our relationships and connections with UNESCO and with Mektor Rossler and the team at the World Heritage Center in particular. It's a very collegiate space, and it's a more and more open space to bring new ideas forward. I'm conscious of the time, and so let me just try to skip through really quite quickly just a few slides about where we're going. So I think the first, as Susan said, is all of our plans. 2020 was the mega year for rethinking our plans for nature conservation on the planet, and it was a mega year for nature and culture because of this constellation of the IUCN World Conservation Congress and the ICOMOS GA. And I want to also flag the developing relationships with the Convention on Biological Diversity and the renewal of the world's biodiversity targets and the huge challenges we face in the impacts we are having on the natural environment, that were all planned at dates through 2020, as you see on this slide, and we were all expecting to be taking a brilliant plan for building nature culture collaborations through 3 planned events, and essentially none of these are happening in 2020. The only event that we have new dates for is the IUCN World Conservation Congress, and that will happen at the start of January 2021. I think Nicole is going to be pasting the link for that for the call. And I think there are 2 things to note as potentials at the World Conservation Congress. So we will bring together a CultureNature Journey of some kind. At that event, we need to rethink rethink how that will work. But I also want to note that across the whole of the program for the IUCN World Conservation Congress, we made the step for this Congress to put youth mainstreaming as an objective. And so everyone that's applied to run sessions at WCC has had to indicate the way in which they will bring young professionals and youth into their work. But also there will be a youth summit, and there are two colleagues. I invited a few colleagues just to join the call. So Hannah Musa is on the call from the Congress team in IUCN, and Christian Schwarzer from our partners, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, who we're working with on the Youth Summit. And the Youth Summit will still take place in some way. It may be a hybrid of online and in person, but there is still a real opportunity to bring collaboration between the nature youth and culture youth networks to Marseille in January 2021. Secondly, we are remaining committed to collaboration with ICOMOS towards whatever happens in the space that will replace the GA in October, and I think are looking forward to what those plans will be. Susan's already articulated what was submitted and what the potentials are. And thirdly, I want to still mention the Convention on Biological Diversity, because there's a very exciting development, and I saw a question from Monica Luengo, I think, about the joint program of the CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, and UNESCO on the links between biological and cultural diversity. And the proposal, we've been working together, so if this is accepted by the parties when the CBD eventually meets, is for there to be a joint program on nature and culture in the next phase of global work on really trying to heal this relationship of people and nature on the planet from 2020, that will continue the brilliant work of UNESCO and CBD, but bring in IUCN, and for the first time in CBD, there's an invitation to ICOMOS, to ICROM, and to a number of other partners to join that effort. So there's lots of watch this space about where we work, but there are still, I think, these big opportunities to really take this agenda to a different level. And clearly part of that is the observation that if we weren't doing it already, that this terrible situation of COVID means that now convening online and these sorts of events that we're having today, which is just so brilliant, is really the future. The second thing that I'd like to say is that we're about to enter a new phase of collaboration between ICOMOS and IUCN, and that is something we've been building over many years, as you've heard, focused on the particular relationship that we've had as advisory bodies to the World Heritage Convention. But we are looking to move that to another level. And one of the targets for this year, and in particular with the ICOMOS GA in mind, was to, for the first time, have a memorandum of understanding between ICOMOS and IUCN, and then to develop a joint work program that would enable us to move forward both our existing but also new potentials for collaboration. And I'm pleased to say, and again, I think with Toshi Kono on the line, it's the first time we're, I think, talking about this together, Toshi, that we have now essentially agreed the MOU, and we will be launching this through a virtual process sometime very soon. In fact, I'm speaking to ICOMOS next on Monday to just plan exactly when we do this, but I'm now confident that we've reached an agreement and we'll be moving that that into a discussion about a joint work program. And then we clearly have important work to build on. Two of the existing collaborations are ones that I hope we will both continue and build on with World Heritage Leadership, which has been something catalyzed by the relationship of IUCN and ICROM. We've now just concluded the collaboration with ICOMOS across all the different units of that program, as Eugene has just explained to you. Connecting practice has been an extremely important way that we've really begun to learn to work together, and I guess sort of trust each other in working together over these three cycles of work. And I'd like to thank the Christensen Fund for, I guess, sort of enabling that to happen. And I think note how important the feedback of that into the practices inside the World Heritage Convention have been. Connecting practice actually started, and I'm not sure this is always something we remember, because of the degree to which separating nature and culture was not only not a very efficient way of working, but it actually, we could see, caused real damage to the aspirations of Indigenous peoples to participate in the World Heritage Convention. And the nomination of Pimachwanake in Canada by the Anishinaabe people was one which didn't succeed through the World Heritage System, not because it wasn't a great nomination, but because we evaluated nature and culture separately at the time, and it forced a rethink. And so we can now see that we're starting to see an opportunity for Indigenous-led conservation to take its proper place in the World Heritage Convention. And connecting practice is one way to really start to fold those lessons back into the World Heritage Convention, but also more broadly into conservation practice. And then the third, which is a new, would have been one of the flagships to a launch in October at the ICOMOS GA, is we will be launching a new nature culture thematic community and a platform called Panorama. Panorama is a program that IUCN coordinates on behalf of a range of partners, and it's a platform for people who work on the ground to share their solutions, to share what works, to tell their stories about conservation success. And so with Panorama, work is organized around a number of thematic communities, and we'll be launching a new thematic community which will be jointly convened by IUCN, ICOMOS and ICROM, and that's a firm program. So this will be something that all of you that can see solutions and opportunities to contribute can offer your experience to as we move forward. But I think beyond that, I just want to sort of speculate a bit around what our long-term goals might be. As Stacey said in the introduction, I have been working in IUCN for a lot of my time since 2007, focused on World Heritage, but I'm currently in the second year of 2 years taking some time to think about this question of the relationship of nature, culture, and people, and to try to then imagine, well, what would a better program look like? And I just want to flag 4 things that I think are the spaces that we need to be talking about, doing things better. So the first is really the need to have a different way to talk about nature, culture, and people, and we still, have this tendency to separate. So we need to find a narrative and a way to understand that. In the real world, people don't separate nature and culture. In the real world, the places are places, and places and people are so intimately linked that we cannot we cannot sort of divide up the world in this way. And so perhaps one phrase which one of the IUCN member organizations is starting to use is, we need to look for a world where we're talking about flourishing diversity. We're talking about the connections of cultural diversity and the diversity of nature, the diversity of biodiversity and of the diversity of the geological memory of the earth. So how do we find that new narrative? That's my first question. The second, out of the work that I've been doing, is really the clarity of the need for us to empower diversity in global conservation practice. I am a English-speaking, English male with a beard, and there are lots of people like me that have been talking about conservation for a long time. We need a world where it's about fewer people that look like me and sound like me, and about a much more diverse view of what conservation needs to look like. As IUCN, we've invested for a long time in putting gender diversity in its proper place in nature conservation, and also recognizing Indigenous peoples as crucial leaders and actors in the conservation world, and we took the step in Hawaii to open a new category of membership for Indigenous peoples. But I'd like to flag 3 other important areas of diversity that have come out of the work I've been scoping. The first is why this call is, I find so brilliant, is there's a real intersection between the connection of nature and culture and engaging youth and intergenerational diversity in conservation. And so it was a surprise to me that I was asked as part of in my last 2 years to also be the IUCN director responsible for piloting better youth engagement in IUCN, but that is one of the things which I'm currently responsible for. And that's a real, I think a real opportunity to accelerate progress. So I hope one of the things we'll talk about and will come from this call is the potential to connect EPWG and the cultural heritage youth networks to the brilliant youth networks that are leading and generating energy for the future of nature conservation on the planet. And Christian and Hannah and another couple of colleagues, Roxana and Sefa Tauli, are all on the call, I hope, listening avidly and wondering how to connect with you. Another diversity priority is to reach out to communities of faith and spirituality. And we can see there that there are huge common concerns and opportunities in the work of ICOMOS and IUCN. And the last diversity that I want to really see us prioritize is linguistic diversity as a major facet of cultural diversity. I think so many of the problems we have in inadequate conservation practice have come from the dominance of my mother tongue. You can even see it in the CultureNature Journey, as we don't have the words to express this connection. But really the lack of sort of respect for and prioritization of linguistic diversity is probably the best manifestation of how conservation practice has not been able to really respect and empower local approaches and successful approaches that work in different cultures. So trying to really push back on the hegemony of English and French and Spanish in our sort of conservation discourse, and really open up a world where we respect linguistic diversity is another possible priority. The third is we have to bring this to ground level. It's very easy to get sort of lost in the concepts, and so we need a real priority for places. The type of approaches that Eugene's been explaining, we've been trying to articulate for World Heritage, we'd like to see as examples of what heritage places, landscapes, seascapes, ecosystems look like when they're managed in a joined up way. And we have to really empower the local managers to and the local communities and the stewards and the Indigenous peoples who hold these places to be able to conserve their worlds. And we need to see principles that apply in urban and in rural and in sort of large landscapes. And then the last culture shift, I think, is also embodied in what we've been doing with the CultureNature Journey, which is this de-siloing, being more joined up, not competing for funds, not competing for attention, not talking over each other, but really a world which could be more collegiate, more focused on benefits for everybody. And I think, hopefully you can see that somehow I think the CultureNature Journey is a manifestation of that, and this call somehow is a manifestation of that. Practically, I think this is my last slide, how do we do that? And I think the opportunities, there are lots of opportunities we haven't taken yet to structure collaboration between IUCN and ICOMOS. ICOMOS has its ISCs and its national chapters as well. IUCN has its commissions, which are our specialist networks. So can we find some collaboration that takes the individual connections that have become so rich into a more institutional set of relationships and projects? And one of the questions I'd like to ask is, where could we have an opportunity here to connect the ICOMOS and IUCN emerging and young professional networks? But I think the most important part of this question is to ask you, what do you think? As Susan said, the thing we've tried to achieve with the Nature Culture Journey is that it's something that responds and it's something that empowers. And I think it's a space where the voice and the leadership of emerging professionals and young professionals can really help us make huge strides in the future. So what do you think? What could we be doing better? How could you contribute? How could we do more? And with that, Stacey, I'll hand it back to you to hopefully hear the questions, observations and ideas that EPWG and others on the call may have. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Tim. So with that, and keeping an eye on the clock, we'll move, well, as rapidly as we can through to our Q&A segment. So we know from the past that the live open Q&A is an especially rich part of our program. So we'll do our best to ensure that we capture a range of the many great points that have been raised. So I guess once again, bearing in mind the time, we will start with a few broad themes, but using the format of a lightning round. So one question per speaker, and then we can perhaps move to a slightly more open dialogue based on how we're going. So at that, what I'll do is I'll also call on both of my co-hosts, Nicole and Gabe, as we've compiled the key questions that have been raised, and we can perhaps start with directing.
Stacey, you're muted at the end.
I'm hoping I wasn't muted for all of that.
Sorry, Stacey, I made a mistake. Sorry, please continue. Sorry.
Okay, well, all I was saying is that, well, bearing in mind the time, I think that we can perhaps look to working through our Q&A segment with the lightning round. So let's start with one for Sue, and I'll hand over to Nicole, as I know that there were a number of questions, but one in particular in relation to overall participation by different groups.
Thank you, Stacey. In fact, one of the questions that we have received the most in looking at the Zoom group chat is actually a matter of participation. And one of the questions is how the CultureNature Journey could also be brought internally at the level of research and work by the national committees and the ISCs.
Yes, I think we've made various attempts to do this with varying levels of success. And I think one of the things I'd like to say is we don't want to use the CNJ, the CultureNature Journey or Nature Culture Journey, as a big stick. We don't necessarily want to force people to jump in before they're prepared to jump in, because everyone has so many demands in their time and interests. So we're not really about checking whether get on board or not. But I can say that some national committees have really embraced the CultureNature Journey concept and have run with their own initiatives. And that would include US ICOMOS, Australia ICOMOS, ICOMOS India, to some extent ICOMOS China, although probably more individuals within ICOMOS China. One of the observations I would make is that we have less take up, if you like, of the CultureNature Journey in Europe than we do in Asia Pacific and the rest of the world. And perhaps that's because they don't see it as relevant. Maybe they see it as something that's about large protected areas or indigenous peoples, or I'm not sure why it is, but we don't have as much interest in those areas. And one of the things we're really keen to see is this exploration, though, of the one area which the European nations have seen as relevant, is that urban landscape area and the rural landscapes area. They're the two sort of, I think, hooks, if you like, for work that people are already interested in that sort of area. So that's not saying that no one from Europe, Nicole, I know you're our most active young professional, emerging professional, but it means that the committees haven't taken it up as much, as they haven't seen it as relevant to them for some reason. And I guess we've got more work to do in that area, but it really isn't about forcing people to take it up. It's about those committees that want to take it up. We want to really help you build those partnerships. And with the, I noticed a few questions scrolling through, which were about ISCs and various ISCs. We have been very active. The rights-based approach group has been involved in every major CultureNature Journey event, as has Andrew Potts' Cultural Heritage and Climate Change Working Group. So we do intersect with those at every event. So if you're interested, jump in. We would love to have you jump in, and we'd love to have your ideas, and we'd love to have you work with your own committees and national committees to organize something. Go for it. Yay.
Thank you, Sue. So let's move to the next question in our lightning round, and that'll be for Maureen. So Gabe, I believe you have one that you'd like to share.
Yes. So for me, actually, I was looking into the capturing the words of biocultural approaches and resilience as words that are being like gathered together in different languages.
Mm-hmm.
But with these different languages, are the perspectives changing, and are the concepts like being modified based on the languages that are being captured? And is there any data that has already interpreted?
Yeah, so in fact, in our survey to site managers, when we asked them about these concepts and if they were using them in their work, we also asked them what words they were using in their own language to describe these concepts, and if there was a difference, maybe a nuance in the meaning. So I think it's a challenge to capture the, as Tim was saying, we are kind of limited in English or maybe only French. And I think that's an important aspect of connecting practice, really trying to grasp the full meaning. So I think it's something we're starting to work on, but it's not an easy thing to take on.
Will there be like a list of like thoughts, like let's say gravitated to resilience in that, and is there any like associated words that have been captured in a dictionary of sorts?
Yeah, so that'll also be in the glossary that we're working on, just trying to show the different meanings, different uses, and how we can kind of bring them together to have a kind of synthesis of the different nuances and aspects of the terms.
Thank you, Maureen. So it's Eugene's turn up next. So I'll hand over to my co-host. Once again, so Nicole, over to you. I know that there have been a couple of questions.
Yes, thank you, Stacey. Actually, Eugene is partially answering already on the chat group, but she will still get similar questions. And one of the actually questions that came out a couple of times is to have an overview of the time frame of delivery of the new manuals, the website, and general the impact assessment guidance for World Heritage.
Sure. If I can actually take this opportunity to thank the ICOMOS networks for reviewing the version of the impact assessment guidance that was circulated end of last year. I think we had an enormous amount of reviews coming in from all the national committees and the scientific committees of ICOMOS, very shrewdly reviewing and pinpointing ways to go forward, and that's been helping us a lot. So based on those reviews and feedback, we are now in the second phase of revising the guidance. So hopefully we'll be able to come out with a much better holistic integrated guidance as a whole. I just wanted to highlight that the whole process of compiling the revised manuals and guidances are going through a very iterative process of review and testing and piloting before we actually push it out officially into the world. So it's taking a little bit of more time than we initially thought as just putting out a publication, so to speak. So hopefully for the impact assessment guidance, we're aiming for it to be published before the end of this year. Obviously, we were originally hoping that we could go for it before, but COVID has played its role and it's slightly being delayed. But the impact assessment guidance is one of the most fastest track, let's say, of all our work. And all the other management manuals and the resilience manual and the EOH toolkit are all aimed for being produced next year. So during the course of next year, we'll be piloting a web platform to host all the different products being drawn out of this whole work. Obviously, it's also going to be a sort of a phase-by-phase approach because it's a lot of products to be uploaded, and we might actually tap into a lot of you to review and also provide us with feedback with it. And hopefully by the end of next year, we'll have a full launch of all the different products that we are aiming for during this phase out there in the open as a web platform, all interconnected with the World Heritage, IUCN, ICOMOS, and ICROM all together. So it's a coordinated ownership and production of all these resources.
Thank you. And so we'll move through to a question for Tim. So I think, Gabe, you had one.
My question is slightly off tangent, but perhaps it's also quite relevant. I want to understand from our speakers now that with the COVID-19 situation, right? So do you think that our perceptions of nature and culture will change now that will poaching issues actually decrease with the air, or the, let's say, will we celebrate traditional indigenous celebrations with social distancing? Do you think, what is your thoughts on the matter?
Goodness. Well, so I'm not sure, Gabe, how to answer. I mean, we've reflected quite a lot in IUCN about the response to the COVID crisis, and obviously the first thing is just to recognise how immediate the impact has been for so many people. And I think if any of you are people impacted, somehow kind of everybody has some sort of impact. But I think some of the the worst experiences of COVID have been kind of unthinkably terrible. So I guess just in terms of sort of what's been happening, right now, I think we've been trying to understand that, but I think it's really too early to answer the question. We're still really unsure at the moment how the next phases will track with COVID. We're not sure how the response will happen, but also we've not really seen the impacts across significant geographies. And I think what's mostly been in the news, depending on where you are, is a very sort of partial reflection of what the realities are. It's hard to imagine that it will not have a significant impact in the way that we think and the way that we work. And perhaps there will be some things that will be positive results. There's a phrase in English that's it's an ill wind or a bad wind that doesn't do some good to somebody. It doesn't blow anybody any good. So let's see. I mean, I think the opportunities to work more flexibly, the challenge to not having so many huge meetings all the time in the world of nature conservation, at least, I think is something we need to be talking about. How people respond, but I think it's really very, very early. I live in a country that's here in Switzerland that's I guess coming out of lockdown, but it's still it was only yesterday we went to our local restaurant for the first time. Sorry, this has nothing to do with nature and culture, but you can really feel for people that don't have the opportunity to work from home, how incredibly difficult this is, and it's still the start of weeks or months or who knows how long until there's some sort of different version of normal that stabilizes. So I really don't know. I mean, I think it's important that we think about this. I think for a number of us that work in nature conservation, the relationship of conservation to health and healthy outcomes for people is something that's been far too little thought about. But I'm not sure how to say more than that. Those are some thoughts, but I think we should not rush to judgment. I guess that would be my my short answer.
Thank you.
Gabriel, can I just add a comment there? One of the things that we've found in Australia, I think, is the growing divide that's happened with isolation, working from home, all those things between Indigenous communities, and not only Indigenous communities, but other communities with economically challenged. And more privileged community people. So for instance, in Australia, all the remote Indigenous communities were locked down totally. You couldn't go in. I mean, I had 4 projects which were all put on hold because the worry was that we would take COVID in, you know, and decimate the elders in the same way that you're seeing is happening in America, from all accounts, with the Navajo. And so our communities were locked down. But it is much more difficult for those people to then continue projects or participate in projects in the same way we're doing now, because the technology isn't always there and people don't have that same access to electronic resources. So there are some real, everyone's so happy with this idea of interconnecting on Zoom and stuff, and it is really good. And we've all upped our skills slightly in this area, some more than others. And but I think we've got to be aware of this. This isn't the answer for everyone. And we will create a bigger divide, I think, between particularly Indigenous communities who live on their country, away from urban areas, and you know, these so-called experts on nature and culture. So I think we've really got to think about this as the pros and the cons of everything.
So thanks very much, Sue, and to Tim, of course, as well. So at this stage, I think we're down to our final 2 minutes. So at that, I'd like to, well, close with one last question to all of our speakers. And I think it's one that's been echoing, well, both through the questions that have been posted, as well as what's on everyone's minds. And that is, how can us, or young people, youth, grads, people at an early stage of their overall career, get their hands dirty and become more involved across the organizations of ICOMOS, IUCN, and ICCROM? So that's a question to all of our speakers.
Well, I'll just say, Tim will have a better answer for this, and so will Eugene probably. But I don't think, from our point of view in the CultureNature Journey, and I would say for the ISCs, those ISCs, not all of them, but those ISCs who are heavily involved in the CultureNature Journey, I don't think there is a barrier. I think if you want to jump in and get your hands dirty, we love dirt. We would love to have you getting your hands dirty. So I'm not saying that is same throughout ICOMOS, but definitely in the CultureNature Journey, this is an avenue for you if you want to take it.
If I can go, I mean, I highlighted a few moments during my slides of different ways of participating, but it's really, I think, sometimes sitting in an international organization and doing a lot of sort of research work or producing manuals or policies and strategies can be very limiting in a sense, because you lose sense of what's going on the ground. And we actually really like having courses where young people come in and actually tell us about what their difficulties are and voicing their experiences and challenges through these courses, so that we can actually take them on board and be able to reflect them into the different materials that we produce. Because unless we are there on the ground, really interacting with you on individual levels, it's very difficult for us to grasp that reality as well. So the more that you participate through the different activities and avenues, I think the more opportunities that we can also respond with and try to link up the different issues and challenges. So I would say, you know, being connected and also feeding us with different ideas and examples, participating in courses, workshops, whenever we have a call out for different papers and conferences. That's one way to go.
Thanks, Eugene.
I can maybe I can say something too. So I mean, just so things that strike me, I guess the first is inside EPWG. So I think, you know, one of the great I guess potentials of EPWG and networks like yours is you're able to be cross-cutting and you know, you're not sort of an ISC for one issue or another issue. You're bringing together people with, you know, across a huge range of disciplines. So I think one would be to try to recognize this interdisciplinarity as a real virtue and an opportunity, and see how you can, you know, keep that idea and build that idea into the work that you do. How might that happen? I guess the second focused on IUCN is, so we do have a structure of commissions. and there are 6 of them. I won't go through the details now, but we can circulate a link if you go to the IUCN website and just go to iucn.org and click on commissions, and you'll see the details of our 6 commissions. Nicole, who's probably ahead of me on everything, can find the link and paste it in the chat. So the commissions is our sort of version. The nearest IUCN has is a sort of as ICOMOS. It's the nearest thing we have to ICOMOS, because it's individuals. It's a peer-to-peer network. You don't pay a fee to be an IUCN Commission member, but you need to volunteer to contribute. So we're in a phase right now, and in fact, Roxana, if Roxana's still on the call, Roxana Bucciocco is one of the people who'll be sort of helping, you know, think what would it look like for IUCN to be more youth engaged, and we're in a phase to really build those opportunities. So what are, you know, that our commissions are being asked to make more space for youth. And for those of you that are working, I guess, with a very strong connection between your practice and nature conservation, see whether the commissions might be one place in IUCN to join. And then my third suggestion is to look at the opportunities, I guess, right now of the Youth Summit at the IUCN Congress, and the youth engagement across the IUCN Congress. The program for Congress is I guess, although the whole thing's delayed, has been largely decided, whereas the program for the Youth Summit will be open to a call for proposals for ideas. So one suggestion might be, and this is a suggestion to my nature colleagues on the call as well, is think what would be the opportunity for EPWG to come together with IUCN young professional networks and propose one of the streams of the Youth Summit in Marseille. So that would be a suggestion. If that would work, that would be one way to bring ideas together, but bring them, you know, out of the Youth Summit into the whole event of IUCN. I guess, you know, I'd like to see, you know, really the leadership that I'm starting to understand comes from emerging and young professionals have a much greater space in shaping the agendas we have. So why don't you try to do something around the Youth Summit in Marseille? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. I think we can say challenge accepted. So if there aren't any other burning questions at this stage, I think now might be a good moment to, well, once again, really say a big thank you to all 4 of our speakers for sharing your thoughts and really, I think, enabling a rich and live discourse. Once again, the power of technology has made it possible for us to be in one place at one time, so to speak. So I'd like to thank my EPWG peers, the ICOMOS Secretariat, and of course, Nicole. A huge amount of prep has needed to have taken place behind the scenes for these sessions. So really cheers to you all. And of course, last but not least, I'd really like to actually thank everyone who has signed in today. There would be no discourse or discussion if it weren't for you. So thank you, and I hope that you've all had a pleasant morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever in the world you are. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, or also please feel free to drop us a line. We are very much a network of friends, so we would love for you to join us. So at that, thanks everyone, and I'm sure we'll see each other sooner or later.